Our next guest just won re-election in the U.S. midterm elections. Please congratulate and welcome Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Congressman, congratulations. Thank you for joining us on the show. So you've been hearing as well, on top of the elections, but in the crypto world, at least, FTX CEO Sam Bankman-Fried, was a well-known in D.C. for his lobbying efforts there. He's the second largest donor to Democrats, sixth largest donor in this election cycle so far, according to Open Secrets, and so far donating almost $40 million to this election cycle. So did you know, Sam? What's your initial reaction to this Binance takeover of FTX?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a very interesting election day and continues. There's still an awful lot of results that we don't know, including likely control of the House and the Senate, which are pretty important to thinking about what progress we make in the Congress on cryptocurrency regulation, something that I think is quite urgent. But Sam Bankman-Fried, let me start by saying this: yes, big donor, but also he spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill in a really important role, which was educating the Congress on, these very technical and to some extent new topics for the United States Congress. And he did that, and I met with him any number of times in a really sort of nonpartisan way, which shouldn't be surprising because there aren't clear partisan divides when we talk about crypto assets in the United States Congress. I don't have a lot of intelligence to add to the news around the possible acquisition and all of that. I'm a veteran. I was a banker in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we watched the internet sort of really emerge and become a major factor in our capital markets. And I see a lot of similarities there, right? I see an awful lot of hype that ultimately is proven not to, have any substance underneath it, and therefore the adjustment of valuations, to put it nicely. I see a lot of uncertainty about what business models will work and which won't, and the ultimate meltdown in the internet market circa 2001 demonstrated a lot of the interconnections that you might not have predicted, which may be at play here in the announced, possible merger. So I do see a lot of analogies to be drawn with the way people invested in and thought about the internet back in 1999 to what we're seeing in the crypto asset market today.
Congressman Himes, first of all, congratulations again on your win last night. It's most likely, or it seems quite likely, that Kevin McCarthy is going to be the speaker. What is your sense in terms of how a Republican majority control of the House will approach crypto regulation, particularly in light of yesterday's events with FTX and Binance, even though these weren't necessarily U.S. entities that collapsed. There was an FTX.com, of course, a U.S. FTX version, and it might affect some U.S. customers. Do you think that Congress's approach might be even more stringent, if you will, on how exchanges report their balance sheets and the relationships they have with prop trading desks? Or do you think that, given that we have a Republican administration, a Republican leadership in the House, do you think that it will maybe be a little more lenient? What's your take?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. And let me answer it two ways. Number one, unclear what's going to happen, but I won't disagree with your conclusion that the highest probability outcome is a narrow majority for the Republicans in the House. So if you think about it, today the Democrats have a 5-seat majority. It is far from inconceivable that come January, the Republicans could have a 5-seat majority, which tells you sort of how the politics, which we sort of, they've been so chaotic, right? What's the effect of Trump? And, oh my gosh, do people hate Joe Biden and everything? It just goes to show you that politics surprisingly sort of swung around a very narrow point. And again, I don't know, maybe the Republicans could have 10 seats. Maybe the Democrats could pull a rabbit out of the hat and retain the majority. I think the probability today is that the Republicans will have a very narrow majority. So you would say, as I would say, that means that people like Patrick McHenry, who's invested a huge amount of time in understanding the crypto asset world, who I think has a constructive and even bipartisan approach to regulation, I think he'll be in a position to continue the progress that has been made. Now, here's the really interesting thing. a very small majority for the Republicans is an incredibly unstable situation. And I don't want to name names, but if there's a 5-seat majority, you can kind of fill in the names of some of the more combustible, volatile Republicans, who've made themselves very famous on, Fox and OA. And again, I'm not going to name names, but you know who I'm talking about here. They will be the Joe Manchin and the Kristen Sinema of the United States House of Representatives. And that is a remarkably, potentially chaotic situation. And by the way, it could call into question whether Kevin McCarthy can be Speaker.
As a side tangent, do you think that there aren't enough members of Congress? Do you think that we've been stuck at 435 for almost a century? Shouldn't we have more members?
There is an argument that I think I agree with, that we should have more members. Today I represent 750,000 people, as does every other member of Congress. And the theory is that if you had more members of Congress, you could have more granular representation, meaning that in more moderate areas, you'd have more moderate representation. So I do think that would probably be a way of creating a more moderate Congress. And it's been proposed. And by the way, the number of representatives in the House of Representatives has changed over time. So it's not a wild and crazy idea.
Feel free to introduce that
just to round out some of the results from yesterday, did crypto play a role in the election at all? I mean, I think in the crypto community, everyone's always talking about the role of crypto in politics, but in reality, this isn't really what people are voting on. I mean, did you see any evidence that crypto was a factor at all in the elections or in the election results?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, I did polling. I've seen dozens and dozens of polls. I promise you, there is no American out there, and I would draw a distinction between our viewership here and sort of your average everyday American. There's no American who is saying that, inflation's important to me and the Roe versus Wade decision, but what I really care about is crypto regulation. By the way, I shouldn't say there's no American. There are a few of them out there, but no, it played no role. And the exciting thing about this topic is that, as I said before, crypto doesn't fall into the maw of partisan divide here. There are plenty of Republicans, plenty of Democrats who are excited to put forward a regulatory framework that will create a lot of certainty. Now, they may differ on exactly what that framework should look like, but this space, it's a really rare and good thing, in as much as the fights tend to be more between the libertarians, who really want no government control, and the rest of the Congress that says, well, we want more or less. But anyway, my point is that this is not a topic that tends to either excite the American people, which is probably good at the end of the day, nor does it cause, a big rift inside the Congress.
It might not get everybody excited, but Connecticut, of course, has a lot of hedge funds, and some hedge funds took it on the chin in the past few weeks with the collapse of crypto and just sort of the ancillary effects of that on maybe their equities, et cetera. Do you think that, what do you think is ultimately, getting back to my original question, what do you think is going to be the approach over the next few months regarding crypto, if at all? Do you think that it's going to be, do you think things will actually slow down because you do have a more laissez-faire potential leadership in the House?
So you're absolutely right in your observation. I mean, one thing that has changed pretty dramatically in the last couple of years is that crypto businesses have grown up inside people's congressional districts, inside their states. I mean, in my own congressional district in southwestern Connecticut, Barry Silver moved Digital Currency Group. And I think the plans for Digital Currency Group were more optimistic 6 months ago than they are today, given all the, shall we say, adjustments in the crypto market.
Our parent company.
Exactly. But to answer your question very specifically, if Patrick McHenry is the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, the bill that emerges will be more laissez-faire than were Maxine Waters chair of the committee, but not radically different. Remember, the two of them negotiated a stablecoin proposal that was not fully baked. It was not ready for prime time. But here's Patrick McHenry and Maxine Waters are very, very different politically, but they did come up with a bipartisan proposal that was pretty close to sort of being taken out of the oven, if I might continue the metaphor. So I don't think you're going to see radical change. Hopefully what you're going to see is more progress. That I can't guarantee. Again, it comes back to the question of if there is a Republican majority, how big is that? How chaotic is it if the Republican majority is very small? These are things that we don't know yet this morning.
Just want to circle around to the FTX deal with Binance. So Bernstein analysts note that a combined company, if Binance were to acquire FTX, could have more than 80% of the global crypto market. And so, there are these antitrust concerns coming out, and I wonder, your thoughts around that regarding the overall, how this overall reflects upon the crypto industry, and any concerns over a non-U.S. based company taking over a company with major U.S. ties.
Yeah, of course. We always are concerned when that happens. Particularly the political situation has gotten really hot with respect to China. And so whenever there's a question of Chinese investment in a technologically innovative business, a lot of antennas go up. But, it's a really interesting question you ask. On the one hand, there's no question that the Biden administration has been much more aggressive about antitrust enforcement than we've seen. We saw this, of course, with the rejection of the publishing deal, Penguin Simon Schuster. This is such an immature market, though, that I just don't know what the conversations might be inside the FTC or inside the Department of Justice. I mean, immature, and I obviously don't mean that in a condescending way, immature in the sense that, you wake up every week and the market looks different and you're surprised by changes. And, the market, however it plays out, it's obviously a tiny fraction of what it will be 10 years from now. So I can't offer a lot of wisdom on that because I just don't know how the traditional antitrust actors like the FTC and the Department of Justice would think about a market that is this volatile, that is changing this rapidly. And, so I just don't know.
Congressman Himes, there was a question a while ago as to where Binance kept its U.S. servers and the location and if there were copies elsewhere outside the United States. Is that something that you would bring up as well? Is that something you see regulators should bring up as well if they do acquire FTX and FTX the U.S. version of it, as to whether or not those servers, that information can leave the U.S.?
Yeah, of course that'll be a concern. And again, in a lot of this stuff, there are analogies that you can usefully use, right? So the idea of foreign ownership of a U.S. exchange, that's not a new idea. In the traditional capital markets, there's lots of examples of that. There's lots of discussions that have been going on for years and years and years around, how does data respect national borders? Should it respect national borders? So again, none of the issues here are radically new. There's twists on a lot of them, but none of them are radically new. You can reason by analogy. But I mean, I draw two conclusions. Number one, government needs to speed up its work on establishing a clear regulatory playing field. I feel that as a Democrat. I think Patrick McHenry feels that as a Republican. Number two, in the meantime, players in the market can also reason by analogy. And I have no business, and I'm not giving legal advice here, but some things are pretty clear around fraud, and fraud will be prosecuted as it has. Conflicts of interest. You were talking a little bit about what it means to run both an exchange and a proprietary trading operation. Conflicts of interest should be, closely consulted with legal counsel. And so I do think that there's an opportunity to sort of reason by analogy here, looking at traditional capital markets. In the meantime, government needs to move more rapidly. And again, not only do I not give legal advice, I don't give investment advice, but, investors in this space need to understand that it is an immature and volatile market, and they need to be careful.
Finally, Congressman, just before we wrap up, I want to ask you about how do you think this reflects upon Sam Bankman-Fried's reputation now that, he was one of the largest donors in this campaign cycle, but a lot of that money could have stemmed from money that was printed out of thin air to support his centralized exchange.
Yeah. Again, it feels to me like 1999 when a whole array of players in the internet that we have long since forgotten were either obliterated. I'm thinking of Webvan and Pets.com. These things were getting funded by very smart people. And I'm not saying that that's the case with FTX. I'm just saying that, it is a very, very young market. And, if you're a Republican, you'd be very angry about Sam Bankman-Fried's political donation. But as I said before, he's also played a critical role, as has much of the rest of the industry, in spending a lot of time on Capitol Hill and educating us around, again, topics that don't naturally break down in the partisan divide.